Thank you, Bob. I think some of you might have seen the beginning of the autopsy video, and you're probably anxious to see the rest of it. So I won't talk for too long, I promise you. But what I want to do is tell you a little bit about our office, what we do, how we do it, why we do it, who we do it for. Then I want to show the video, the autopsy video. It's about 35 minutes long. And then I want to take questions all along the way. So anytime you have a question, please raise your hand and let's take care of it right then. Then after the autopsy video, I have a couple little presentations that are called Fact or Crap, and it's like a little spoof on the CSI effect. So we want, CSI has kind of set the bar. CSI is pretty much accepted in the country these days as reality, and it does cause us some problems. So what I want to talk about is a little bit OMI versus CSI and show some pictures of that. So getting on to OMI, you pretty much know what we do at the Office of the Medical Investigator, right? You have a pretty good idea. I want to thank you for coming out on your own time tonight to find out a little bit more. We are the death investigation agency for the state. We are one of 16 states where we have a single office that handles the whole state. And of those 16 states, most of them are East Coast, so we're certainly the biggest. We're probably the office in the country that has the single biggest geographical area that one office handles. We're also fortunate to be located within the medical school of UNM. So we're one of maybe 3 or 4 ME offices that are affiliated with an academic side. So we're also an we have a pretty high educational function. We are training medical students, we're training residents, pathology residents, and we're training forensic pathology fellows all the time. But our main job is death investigation. What the state does is they've developed a statute which tells us what they want us to investigate for the state. And these are deaths which are unusual, suspicious, violent, unattended by a physician, deaths that may occur on a job site, may occur in a hospital, it may be medical malpractice, it may be surgery, may be childbirth, deaths that occur when a person is in custody, that occur as a result of an infectious disease, an environmental condition, drug death, alcohol death, about 18 categories of death that they want us to look into. So what does that come out to numbers-wise? In recent years, the typical annual death number in New Mexico is about 14,000. 14,000 in any of the recent years. Of course, it's going up a little at a time. So based on those criteria, out of 14,000 deaths, we will investigate 5,000 of those deaths. So it's a pretty hefty number. And out of 5,000 of those deaths, we will probably bring in about 3,000 of those bodies into our office in Albuquerque. The other 2,000, we can tell, our investigator can tell at the scene of the death that it's a natural death. We can probably find a doctor. There's no litigation, there's no criminal activity involved, so the body doesn't have to be brought in to be examined by us. But 3,000 bodies will come into our office in Albuquerque, and we will probably do about 2,100 autopsies on those bodies and about 900 external exams. You'll see the autopsy in the video, and the autopsy is a good representation of how our office works. An external exam is just a very minute look at the external aspects of the body, taking of fluids for toxicology testing, not opening the body like you'll see in the autopsy. So what does that do for us numbers-wise? We work every day. We do autopsies on Saturdays and Sundays. Just because it's a big load, we're in a small facility, we have to move bodies through fairly quickly. We don't even have a lot of storage space for bodies. So our average is about 7 or 8 autopsies, 7 or 8 cases a day, every day. And so this is today. These are the cases that we took care of today, 7 cases. And so it's kind of an average day for us. Unfortunately, it's not an average day for these unfortunate individuals. They had a bad day. Things are all relative. If you think you had a bad day today, you didn't make the list, so it could have been worse. So, we call this the docket. We post this in the hallway. On the way into the autopsy suite, and this is the first thing everyone looks at when they come to work, because you don't always learn, about a death as quickly as we do. And so we have people come in and they learn about a relative just by looking at the docket, or they learn about a friend or an associate. And if that happens and we are doing an autopsy or an investigation, you really don't want to be in the building when we do that. So you get a free day off. No questions asked, just take off. And I don't feel like it's anything that gets abused in the office either. And I've been there 10 years. I've had 4 friends die that I've just didn't want to be around the place, for their autopsies. A safety officer, a couple of people that I sang in the choir with in church, and my guitar teacher, all 4 of them. So I want to talk a little about the cases. Can't mention names because, we don't even know that everyone here's been notified. The external exam we're going to do, one of these will be an external exam. It was a 54-year-old from Albuquerque. He just was found unresponsive on his couch at home. He was obese. He had a history of hypertension, no foul play, no trauma. He was a very, very heavy smoker. At the time, we had found a doctor that had been attending him. The doctor, however, refused to sign the death certificate, so we didn't have a choice. We had to take this case and do an external exam. Probably the combination of just looking at him, taking his toxicology fluids, reviewing his medical records real thoroughly would tell us what the cause of death was, and it was probably heart-related. Let's see, we had a little baby boy, 5 days old. He didn't weigh a lot, 4.5 pounds. Didn't really look bad, had a little bit of a yellowish tinge to him. He was just found unresponsive in his bed yesterday morning. Normally, and you've heard of the term SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, this could be a SIDS death, but our office kind of is a little restrictive about it. We call SIDS deaths between a month and 6 months. And this baby being 5 days old, very likely we may not find anything. But he had a yellowish tinge, so we may find a liver problem with him. Chances are it could be an undetermined death. Let's see, a 33-year-old from Albuquerque, a female. She was found at home by her boyfriend. She was unresponsive at home. He called EMS. They took her to Loveless. She was dead on arrival at Loveless. The 2 of them had a history of domestic violence. They had both been in jail for domestic violence against each other. She was an abuser, a polysubstance abuser, and she was also an alcoholic. So again, reviewing the medical records, but there's a good chance that this is going to be a toxicology case. So probably go back to tox. Then we had a 58-year-old. He died at UNMH. He fell off a bridge in Santa Rosa back on the 30th of August. Had a spinal injury, was stabilized for a while, but then started falling off, started becoming unresponsive. Had a history of cirrhosis, a lot of alcohol abuse to him. And it probably would go back to the fall off the bridge. We track things back to the event that precipitates them. So what happens is, in a case like this, if the fall led him into some kind of a medical condition that eventually killed him, we will consider the death accidental. And in extreme cases, say a person is mugged, and develops a slight seizure condition because of head injury, and dies perhaps 10, 15 years later from a seizure. We will relate that seizure back to the original injury, and we will call it a homicide. And a person who was maybe spent some time in jail for a mugging will be picked up again and then will be tried for a homicide. And that's not infrequent. We see that happen maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Let's see, 31-year-old decedent, a male, was at a hotel in Las Vegas with his girlfriend and his infant son. They were drinking, they were smoking marijuana, they went out to eat at Taco Bell, came back, smoked some more marijuana, and then yesterday morning he was unresponsive. So there might have been more to it than marijuana, you know, which is what she's saying. So alcohol again, drugs again are going to play a role. Like in the next case. Next case is from Las Cruces. A 66-year-old man was found unresponsive in the bathroom. He was a heavy smoker, he was a heavy drinker, and a cooker and a spoon and a syringe were found in the bathroom with him. And in his case, we were still trying to locate next of kin. So there's a lot of drug stuff going on in New Mexico, huh? This kind of tells you that. This might be a little heavy on drug cases, but we get an awful lot of drug cases. Our main category of cases are accidents. Most of those are traffic accidents, but I'll tell you, the accidental drug overdoses is creeping up. It almost evened out. I think last year in 2007, we had like 460 traffic deaths, and we had 444 overdose deaths or drug-related deaths. So it's really jumping up a lot. So our largest category of cases are accidents. After that comes suicides. Suicides have been picking up quite a bit. I think a very high year last year with like 388 suicides or so. We generally have been running about one a day, but we're starting to creep up a little more than that. In suicides, we're probably consistently within the top 5 in the country. Most suicides are older men, but a growing percentage of the population, teenagers and younger people, are on the increase. Not I wouldn't say totally alarmingly, but enough to get a lot of people's attention that it's jumping up. Most of the suicide states are western states, and there's a lot of theories about that. Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho, Montana. You know, people are spread out quite a bit. You don't have really immediate support systems. A lot of the people in the West, in recent times, have migrated from the East, don't have extended families. We have a lot of guns out here. You know, guns play a role in the suicides, play a role in most anything. I think what would happen at our office is, without the big 3, which is guns and alcohol and drugs, we'd probably be laying people off, because that seems to be the basis of a lot of our business. Seems to be where it comes from. And so after accidents and suicides, we have homicides. Homicides a little higher last year, maybe 194, 195 last year. Generally runs between 170 and 200 or so homicides. So it's not a high number. We're certainly higher than the median for the United States, but we're not in those alarming numbers, you know, that you see out of Detroit and Washington and New Orleans and a few places like that. But homicides hit you pretty hard emotionally. They take more work because the doctors are going to be on the stand, you know, talking about the homicide, showing the pictures, showing the results of the autopsy. So they're going to spend more time on the homicide. And when they come in clusters, they're harder on us. It seems. I always use the example of back in 2005. Do you remember John Hyde, the John Hyde case? John Hyde on October 18th, 2005. He was a schizophrenic that went off the deep end with his medications in Albuquerque, and he killed 5 people in one day, and 2 of them were police officers. And so we did 5 homicide autopsies in one day. And police officers, it's just, they have a very compelling tradition that one of their, brothers dies. They stay with him all the way through to the burial. So like the 18th was a Thursday, so Friday night, or Thursday night, there were probably a dozen police officers that just stayed at OMI throughout the whole night, just to be there, for their fallen officer. And the next day, Friday, we probably had about 25 or 30 police officers in our building the whole day And we don't have a big building. We're all packed in pretty tight. But they were there the whole day in their dress uniforms, dress hats, white gloves, silver braids, just to be, with their fallen brothers. And sitting in the, not in the autopsy room, but in the conference room, the reception area. We had about 25 police cars parked outside. And it was just a really heavy, depressing day. At OMI, we really couldn't survive at OMI unless we tried to keep it light. We joke a lot, not disrespecting the dead, but otherwise, just about anything that happens in that building is just going to put you in a depressive spiral, and you really need help to keep that from happening. So we try to lighten it up, but when we have a day like that, what can you do? You can't really say anything. You can't take a chance of saying the wrong thing. So you just bear that black cloud that kind of hangs over you for the whole day. And it really hangs around for a long time. We were probably collectively depressed as an organization until Thanksgiving or so. It was just really dark. And that happens from time to time. And multiple homicides seem to set that off, as much as anything. So those are pretty much the types of cases that we are handling. About 2,100 autopsies on this, this differentiation of cases. A little bit about our staff. Our main stars are forensic pathologists, and they are, I guess we consider them on the top of the vocational food chain, in our place. At least we like to let them think that, because it always works better when you're dealing with professional people, get the pedestal high enough and the relationship works out okay. And we've been able to do that, I guess, because we have an office where everyone really gets along pretty well and gets together from time to time. But our doctors, we have 8 doctors, forensic pathologists. They're certainly, the most educated and the highest paid in our office. Education-wise, they after high school, they are going to college for 4 years of pre-med education, mainly specializing in biology, chemistry, things like this. After that 4 years, they are going to go to medical school for 4 years, become doctors. After that, they're lacking a specialty, so they're going to do a residency. So our doctors are going to go to a pathology residency, which takes 4 years, and they rotate through forensic pathology, anatomical pathology, clinical pathology, virology, serology, hematology, a whole bunch of ologies. Because really a pathologist is kind of considered a doctor's doctor. A pathologist doesn't generally deal directly with patients. A pathologist specializes in something special and works for doctors that have the patient relationships. For example, a hematologist is going to specialize in diseases of the blood, leukemia, anemia, things like that, blood disorders, and he will act as a consultant to a doctor that is treating a patient for that. But the hematologist will, have the most information on treatment protocols, diagnostic testing, things like that. So, in our case, they're going to go through the 4 years of residency. Then they're going to do 1 more year of forensic pathology fellowship. And they may do another year on top of that of forensic neuropathology fellowship. So when you look at it, it's 13, 14 years after high school. So it's a lot of schooling they're going through. But it starts paying off when they come to us or go to wherever they're going to go to be hired on. And, it's good they're finally going out to get a job because they're in their middle 30s by now. And we will hire them, I think about 2 years ago, we hired a couple pathologists that came right out of training, and we started them out at about $135,000 a year. So they start out with a pretty good salary, and if they're going to stay with the university or in most places for 20 years, they'll probably push that salary up to between $250,000 and $300,000 a year. So it's a good salary. It's more than I'm ever going to make, that's for sure. But they, and that's Albuquerque too. So if you consider if they're going to go to LA or New York or Chicago, they're certainly going to make a lot more than that. And if they go into a different field, once you go through medical school, if you want to go into things like neurosurgery, some aspects of radiology, some aspects of, well, certainly cardiology, things like that, you can make maybe $700,000 to $800,000 a year in those fields. But the thing about forensic pathology, it's a rewarding profession from the standpoint of what you're able to do for families, for law enforcement, and yet it's not a totally consuming medical profession. Many of them are. Many of them, you're just so consumed with what you're doing, you're making tough decisions, you're working long hours, it's just very, very stressful. I don't get the feeling that our work is all that stressful, in spite of its importance. Our doctors, they probably work about a 50 to 55-hour week, and that's not a long week. A lot of us, are working that ourselves. Let's see, are dealing with patients. It's pretty easy to deal with our patients. They're pretty placid. They're not a complaining bunch at all. And you guys, it's you've had doctor's appointments, and you go in and you wait and you wait and you wait. Well, when we have a heavy workload, say we get maybe about 15 or 20 cases a day in one day, we may not even get to some of those cases for 2 more days. And, they don't complain about that. And in fact, we don't have much in the way of accommodations either for our patients. You've been into doctors' waiting rooms, and they're pretty nice. I mean, maybe the magazines are old, but the chairs are comfortable. Sometimes there's a fish tank, and things like that. Boy, we don't have anything like that for our people. They're on steel slabs. It's cold. We keep them at 40 degrees. It's dark. They're in plastic bags. There's no music. I mean, it's got to be pretty stark. It can't be fun at all, except maybe around Christmas. Some Christmases, at least more recently, what we've done is we have a walk-in cooler where we keep about between 35 and 50 bodies or so, and it's maybe 2/3 the size of this room or so. And what we do every Christmas is we decorate the cooler, and we will put Christmas lights around it. We'll get a little Christmas tree and light it up. Sometimes I've been in there, there's been a boom box in there playing some Christmas music, And like when I said earlier about lightening the place up a little bit, that's kind of some of the things that we feel we have to do. And it's not disrespectful, but it's just a matter of keeping your sanity. And people, after they see the autopsy and we talk about this some more, they ask, well, how do you work in a place like that? It's all about death and it's all about dying. And sometime when classes are there, families will come in. Because we have a grief counseling function that I want to tell you about. But families will come in and you hear god-awful things. You hear screaming and wailing and, crying. And it's really day after day just hearing that. It is tough to get by in that place. And I tell people generally that probably all of us that work there are a little wacko in some way. You're either that way before you work there, or it becomes that way, after you're working there. You're working with some kind of dysfunction. But I think we get along because we understand the importance of our job, and I don't think there's any substitute for helping people, for just offering a compassionate hand or word or what have you to people when they really need it the most. And those are the rewards of the job. That's what really lifts you up and gets you past the depression, the brutality, some of the stuff you see, and we do see some pretty awful stuff in that place. Let's see, that's kind of a little bit about the docs. We have, if any of y'all are interested at all in going into medicine, you think you may end up down at the university, we have a fantastic program that only exists in about 4 or 5 locations in the country, and that is that we hire undergraduate students as morphology technicians. We have about 20 morphology technicians, and these are the people that help the doctors with the autopsy. They do most of the cutting, they do all of the photography, the x-ray, the toxicology, not the testing, but the extraction of fluids for toxicology, the extraction of sterile samples for serology. They collect trace evidence, that gets turned over to the crime lab. They're responsible for chain of custody for the evidence and valuables. It's a really, really responsible job. And to go in there and to see, 18 and 19-year-olds doing this job, you figure, wow, these guys are getting really in on the bottom floor of medicine. This is a great opportunity. And I think Duke, Stanford, Michigan State, one or two other schools offer this opportunity to students. And we hire them right out of the student hire program. We start them out at like $8.50 an hour. They work with us for about a year, and then they're qualified to be part-time staff, so we promote them to part-time staff. So they get benefits, they get staff benefits, and their salary's going to bump up to maybe, if they work for us for 3 or 4 years, they're going to be making about $11.50, $12.50 an hour for us. Most of them work about 16 to 30 hours a week, but by having a lot of them, we can schedule them such that they can maintain a full course load at the university. A lot of them at the end of 3 or 4 years are going to move on. The percentage that get into the medical school the first time is pretty high coming out of our office. Still, some of them, have to wait 2 or 3 years. Medical school application process is not automatic, and it does take some time. But boy, you just get a really break by getting into our office and spending that time there. So, if you find yourself at UNM, you're interested in medicine, you have to come over to the Office of the Medical Investigator and apply for a morphology tech job. We probably hire somewhere between 5 and 6 a year. And all we're looking for is a semester of anatomy and physiology. That's all we're looking for academically. We will take you back there and we will take you through 2 full days of autopsy, along with the tech to see how you handle it. You may be excited about it now, but then maybe when you see the video, you'll say, the hell with that. That's nothing I'm interested in. And some people can handle it and some people can't. And it's not an attribute, nor is it, a deficiency. It's just up to your nature whether, this is something for you or whether it's not. So think about the Morph Tech program and try to remember that, if you happen to be in a circumstance where it's going to be good for you. Let's see, the rest of our staff, we have investigators. I have 12 investigators that work in Albuquerque. They work around the clock, 24/7. Well, the office is open around the clock. They don't work around the clock. But they handle all of the deaths that we respond to in Bernalillo County, these 12 people. And then throughout the rest of the state, we have about 135 medical investigators that work for us part-time throughout the rest of the state. And we train them. They actually part-time on-call. They really kind of moonlight for us, meaning they have jobs in the law enforcement field or the medical field. They already know about OMI. They want to have a closer association. They want to make a little bit of money, and it's not a lot of money that they make with us. But they want to do something also that seems like community service, to their community, to their county. And so we about 135 that we have right now. We usually roll over maybe about 15 or so a year. So we have a couple training classes every year, and we just train them for a week. We bring them in. They don't need college degrees. A high school degree is enough with some experience in either the legal side or the medical side. And they come and they spend a week with us in autopsy. We teach them how to manage bodies, how to take fluids, give them a test, certify them, and they go home and they get on a roster, and then they respond to cases in their area, during certain periods of time during the year. We've had some of them as long as maybe upward to 35 years have worked for us. The guy up in the Four Corners area, his name's Richard Malone. He's worked with us for probably about 30 years. He was the guy that came on the first 2 hantavirus cases back in 1993. That's when we first discovered the hantavirus. He saw like 3 cases in succession within about a week and a half of a respiratory-related death you know, with really similar symptoms, but something we hadn't seen before. So the third body he came in with, spent the time with the doctor, worked through the scene, you know, and the scene, of course, is very important in diagnosis of hantavirus cases. So they worked together, and we brought in CDC from Atlanta, and in about 3 months, we had the disease pretty well characterized. This was back in 1993. So having a really good investigator system throughout the state is kind of what holds the office together. So those are the investigators, and the third part of the stool, the third leg of the stool is my group. I'm the business manager there, so I do the budget and the accounting and the finance, and I do the personnel matters, the hiring and the firing, run the subcontracts, do all that. I mean, we run the place like a business. We have about we run it on about a $6 million a year budget. And I think the part of my office that is really different from just about any ME office in the country is that I have a grief counseling staff. So I have 4 master's degree social workers who specialize in grief counseling. And this is a program that came into being in the early 80s when people were alarmed that SIDS deaths were very high. We were running in New Mexico maybe 80 to 90 SIDS deaths a year. And that's dropped off through education more than anything, and now it's maybe about 12 or 15 SIDS deaths we see. But it was good to get the program started. And the program started strictly for SIDS death, and it expanded. And now our grief counselors deal with the families of anyone that comes through our office. They probably are working with upward to 1,300 families a year. The families show up, you know, pretty much out of schedule. You know, they lose a loved one during the night, during the previous day. The body is brought to our office, and the next morning, the family shows up at the front door at 7 or 8 in the morning. They were told where the body was brought, you know, by the police or by the EMT people. And they just want to be close to their loved one, and they want to find out what's going to happen at OMI. You know, how long is this going to take? What's going to go on? And they show up, and they're not in very good shape, you know, emotional shape. But our grief counselors, by virtue of being on our staff and being there, you know, can take them in, sit them down with in a special family room, take them to the conference room, talk to them, just get them started on recovering from their grief. Help them with funeral arrangements if it's appropriate, diffuse the situation, tell them, you know, why their loved one is at OMI, talk about the autopsy process, you know, doesn't take a long time, it's a straightforward process, it's not disfiguring. Probably most of the bodies that come to us later that same day, they will be released to funeral homes, so it doesn't take long at all. But families really need the help. It's good. We get extended families, you know. We get groups of maybe 14, 16, 18 people that come in. Sometimes they're not completely together, meaning sometimes they're not all sober. Sometimes they're very violent. We probably, in our conference room, probably once a year, close to once a year, we have to call in the campus police because they start fighting with each other. And it's always about possessions. You know, I once heard a saying that you don't know how well you get along with your siblings until you have an estate to divide up. And that's what we see. That's what we see with these people. They just start fighting about the car keys, the wallet, the apartment, you know. And you've already seen what you think is the worst side of humanity, you know, back in the autopsy suite. And then you come into the grief room, and you see how these people are getting along with each other or not getting along with each other. And it gets pretty depressing. But it's good to have counselors that can sit down with them, talk to them, diffuse the situation, and kind of get them going, you know, started on getting their lives back together. And we stay with people. They come back, they have recurring appointments with us. Sometimes we travel to their area, you know, people that can't come in. And for lengthy periods of time, you know, there's families that we've been dealing with for maybe 6, 7 years. And as long as we can help them, as long as the rapport is there, we will continue to work with them. And the service is free. The service is free. Not a lot of places in the country that you can go for free, for free counseling for a lengthy period of time after you've lost a loved one. So that's kind of the staff. That's about as long as I can probably go. And what's happening at OMI? A really big thing that's going on now for us is we have a new building that's being built. We've been in our building since 1972. Went into this building with a staff of 16 people doing 180 autopsies a year. And we are still in the same building. We've tried to steal a little bit of floor space from the state lab that we share the building with, but basically we've gone from 16 and 180 or so up to a staff of 60 doing 2,100 autopsies. So we are just so squeezed in. It's unbelievable. We've been working on a new building for probably about 8 years now. We broke ground on it on the 12th of May of this year. It's right next to I-25 between Lomas and Indian School on the east side of I-25. If you've noticed that area, just recently we're close to completing a big cancer center in that area. Actually, that's the direction the medical school is expanding in. It's expanding toward the west there. So that's our big news. Let's see, budget-wise, we have a lot of budget activities going on. I was up at Shiprock on Monday talking to the Indian Affairs Committee, talking about some arrangements with the Navajos and with other Native Americans as far as doing autopsies for them. We're going to meet with the Legislative Finance Committee next week to talk about our budget. We're a little in the hole, a little bit over $1 million in a hole because we've had issues with toxicology and issues with transportation. We are one of the few states that takes bodies back to the funeral home at our own expense rather than charging the family. So, you get round-trip transportation in New Mexico. You don't get it in many states. And the gas situation has caused our transportation budget to jump from probably somewhere around $550,000 a year up to about $725,000 just in the last 2 years. So that's contributed to our budget deficit, but we're working on it with the legislature and it works okay. We get a straight appropriation from the legislature of about $4 million a year, and we make another $2 million just through other services that we provide. We do autopsies for families, for hospitals, for the FBI, the BIA, and we also are the agency that issues cremation permits. So if you want to have someone cremated in the state of New Mexico, we have to issue the permit. And the reason we do that is because it's a cross-check for, suspicious actions. We want to make sure that the body either came through our activity or that it's signed by a legitimate doctor and, that it's above board before we issue the permit. And in New Mexico, the move towards cremations is pretty high. When I start working at OMI about 10 years ago, about 4,000 cremations a year, 4,000, 4,500 cremations. Last year, it was about 7,800. So it's more than half of the people now that die in New Mexico are cremated. So that gives us an income charging for those things, and also consultant cases that we do our work on. So we bring in about $2 million income on our own. And that's about all I want to say so far. Do you guys have any questions? Yes, sir.
Are there any groups or religious groups or ethnic groups that don't allow the autopsies?
Yeah, that is always a big issue. And it's not groups overall. It's like segments within groups. Everyone hears that, you can't autopsy a Native American. They absolutely refuse. Well, not true. It kind of goes by the family, and some of the families are real traditional and some of them are not. And what we do is, if we have a case, Native Americans are different because they have their sovereignty, and we cannot go on the reservation and investigate a case. We can only go on the reservation at their invitation. And that is normally going to be for a homicide or a case that the police want to have done, and in that case, the family really doesn't have any say-so in it. The autopsy has to get done. But then when Native Americans die on state property, we are the jurisdictional agency, so we have the choice as to what we want to do. We really work hard, I think, to get a hold of the family and find out what their desires are. And we find out, after we've explained the autopsy to them, that it's more often than not, they will go ahead and acquiesce to the autopsy. We do, like Native Americans, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, they all have traditions that require that they be buried within 24 hours of death. Not all of them, but a lot of them do, and we're able to accommodate that. We put their autopsies ahead of everyone else's. With Native Americans, some of the cleansing and some of the sewing and stitching requirements on the body, we will do that for them and with them. We'll go into one of our isolation rooms and go through the religious process with them. So we're pretty accommodating in all of that, and I think we've grown to know, what the traditions and the cultural, things are that impact how we should do our business. But we still get lawsuits in spite of it. That's unavoidable. Any other questions? Let's go with the autopsy then.
Let me just remind you that the restrooms are back that way. You need to do that.
I don't know how to cut it. But try not to remember the counseling session, because Norm is really a crappy counselor. You notice he did all the talking? Yeah. Well, when I give this presentation with my grief counselors, they always make me turn it off before the counseling session because it's so bad. But anyhow, that's a combination of a little medicine and morality. Yes, sir?
Do you ever hold the heart up like a trophy?
You what?
You ever hold the heart up like a trophy?
Do we ever do that?
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of doctors do that sometime, yeah. And it's only when they've made a great discovery, within the heart, yeah. We leave the head intact. We never hold the head up, though. Yeah. Any questions? Autopsy takes about 2.5 hours. And this was a pretty standard autopsy. If it's more complicated, multiple gunshot wounds, stabbing wounds, things like that, it's going to take longer. And it depends on who's doing the autopsy. One of our staff doctors is going to take about 2 hours. Our chief, Dr. Zumwalt, takes about 45 minutes for an autopsy. And a new resident or what have you that's in there for the first or second time, probably going to, maybe take as long as all day. I think I don't know if you remember the 3 teens in Albuquerque that were shot in the East Mountains. Geez, that was a long time ago now that I think of it. I think it was back in 99 or so. They were shot with an AK-47, and each of them was shot about 18 or 19 times. And those autopsies took like a day and a half each, because you have to track all the individual wounds and stuff like that. Any question? Yes, ma'am.
How do you make the bodies look normal after that? Before you said there was that after the autopsies, the bodies would look fine.
Yeah, they just stitch back. When you do the head, you cut across the top, and then you cut inside down to about here, and then you just fold it over. And so when you fold it back over, you haven't done any disfigurement in the face. And it just stitches back together. Yeah.
What do you fill it with?
Do we what?
What do you fill the body with?
The way you saw the end of the autopsy is just pretty much how the body leaves us. What happens is we collect the tissue and the organs in a couple bags. You know, we have the Tupperware containers and we line them with a plastic bag. So you end up with 2 bags and they go back into the chest cavity, and then you put the breastplate on and then you stitch back over, and that's it. If you noticed, they talked about the carotid sheath and the jugular. You know, we tie those off so that the funeral home, when they do the embalming, they can push the embalming fluid in, and that pushes the blood out. So they replace the blood with embalming fluid. The funeral home does. There's going to be a couple of things that they will do. You saw them take the vitreous fluid out of the eye, and the eye kind of sinks. Even if they don't do that, after you die, your eyes start sinking back into your head. And so generally what the funeral home is going to do is it's going to put an eye cap in there, you know, which is like a glass eye. And then sometimes they'll even stitch the lid closed with a small stitch because, you know, you don't want your eyes open during the funeral. So they may stitch it. Sometimes they'll stitch the jaw closed also so that it just won't spring open. So the funeral home does a lot of that work. Any other questions? What are we worried about during the autopsy? We're worried about bloodborne diseases, airborne diseases. You see they're pretty well masked up. When you go in and you're working in autopsy, you have so much plastic and covering on, you really don't feel, as much as you're working with the body, you still feel a separation from it. So, you know, that's kind of one thing that helps you do it. But we're worried about, say, tuberculosis. We're worried about meningitis. In the video there, they opened the chest cavity with the bone saw. We don't do that anymore. We use, you know, lopping shears, you know, that you'll trim a tree with. That's how we cut. We just cut right up. Because what happened, I think probably about 6 or 7 years ago, we had 3 successive cases all within a week or so where we had undiagnosed tuberculosis. And I remember I was back in the autopsy for one of them. It was an older lady. She was about 95 or so, and she was still very active. She shopped. She drove a car. And what happened with her at home was she had a big oaken dresser, and she was opening the top drawer, and she ended up pulling the dresser right over on top of her. It was really heavy. She was small, frail. She couldn't get out from under the dresser, so she asphyxiated just under the weight of the dresser. But when we opened her up and we exposed her lungs, they were just very yellowish, greenish, kind of pussy, you know, pretty advanced tuberculosis. She'd probably had it for a long time. She probably had a nasty cough, you know, for about 30 years, but never saw a doctor. And then what the problem with the saw is, when you're using the saw, if you go a little too deep into the cavity, you know, you're going to aerosolize that material and bring it up into the air. And we give us all the opportunity to breathe it and get tuberculosis. Well, we all went and got tested, and we were okay with it. Apparently our masks were working well. But after we had 3 kind of cases like that, we decided we're just going to use the lopping shears. You know, the hell with the saw. It's just kind of too dangerous in that area. And sometimes you stick yourself, and sometimes you cut yourself. Sometimes you have fluid exchange, you know, with the deceased, and you don't know what they've got, you know, and you know the people we have, the drug overdoses, things like that. You know, our population that we see at OMI is generally at risk for HIV and for hepatitis C, B and C, and so we do have accidents. But everyone that cuts uses a Kevlar glove. You know, the high impact plastic, you know, they get it into a thread and weave it into a glove, and it'll protect you from a light accident or a light mistake. But sometimes, you know, we do get a bad cut, or we get a needle stick, and depending on the assessment of the risk factor of the victim and depending on what our employee health people say, we've had doctors and technicians start on the HIV treatment, just to be sure. If you start on the treatment within 4 hours of exposure, you can avoid contracting HIV. And you know, if it looks like that's what they should do, they go ahead and do that. We haven't had any HIV cases. We haven't had any Hep C or any tuberculosis in our office. So we've been pretty fortunate about that. Any parts bother you any more than any of the others, or the autopsy? I know you like the stomach contents. You know, people always like the stomach contents. I know how gross that is. We don't spend much time analyzing stomach contents, but look in a case like this. You know, if you got an investigative mindset, what are you going to do when you see the contents and you see that this guy probably died of a drug overdose? He was in a hotel. He might have made a drug deal, you know, wherever the restaurant was or somewhere in the location of the hotel. And what did that look like? Did you really look at it? No? Green chili stew? Looked just like processed green chili stew, you know? And so maybe if you're doing some detective work, you know, what do they have? And this was a Canadian video, and it was in Vancouver. You know, and they don't have a lot of Mexican restaurants in Vancouver. They might have a Tomasita's or, you know, a Garduño's or something, and maybe you want to go there if you're following up on leads and just scope the place out and see if there's drug deals going down in this restaurant. So that's what you might use the stomach contents for, but we don't delve into them that often. Any other questions? No. Well, let's do the factor crap. Thank you.
How long does that take?
It can take about 20 minutes.
Okay, because we usually stop about 8 o'clock. So.
By 8, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
I'll try to talk fast. And there's 2 of them, 2 different things, so maybe you can help me get to the second one. Did you see more about your insides than you really care to know? Huh? Yeah, if you get over to my office, I can probably make a copy. I only have one other copy right now, and I want to send you a copy, I think, for the tape here. So
That'd be great.
yeah, I can make one available.
Is that film copyrighted? You remember?
I think it is, but we don't pay attention to it.
Well, okay, we'll talk about that.
It's Canadian.
It's Canadian. It's a foreign film.
Okay, so you
Yeah,
push this button when you're ready to go?
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha. This is factor crap. Seta was a medical student at our place back in 2004, and she put this together. Normally when we have a medical student or a resident come in and do a 3-month rotation with us, we ask them to put a presentation together that they're interested in. Maybe it's a specific part of the autopsy, specific type of autopsy. But Seta went ahead and did this. And what she did was when she gave this presentation to us, there's a lot of questions in it. So I'm going to be asking you some questions about whether the technology is fact or whether it's crap. And she kept track of our answers, and what she did was she baked a big cake, you know, that looked like a brain. It was all wavy, and it had gray icing and silver and white icing in it. And the person that got the most answers, correct answers, won the cake. Well, I thought I could pick up on something like that. I wasn't going to do any baking or anything, but what I did was when I first gave this presentation a couple years ago to, I think it might have been Sandia High School, I kept track of the answers, and the person that had the most right answers, I gave them an OMI body bag. And they thought, wow, this is really neat, an OMI body bag. Well, I tell you, this girl's mother didn't think it was neat at all, because I got it back in the mail about 3 weeks later with a really nasty, nasty note, you know, is, wow, you work in OMI, I would think you of all people would have sensitivity to death and things like this. And the bag was empty, you know, and it hadn't been used. So I didn't know why she was so upset about it. So I guess I don't do that anymore. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at 4 CSI scenes, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about them. So this is the first scene. There's a woman strangled in her home. Seidel goes to the scene. She sees 2 half-empty wine glasses. She can't see anything on the glasses particular, but she takes them back to the crime lab anyhow. Back at the crime lab, they dust down the glasses. They find prints on one of them. She scans the fingerprint into the computer, and right away the computer comes back And you've seen it happen. It says match, 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 and it flashes a match, and it tells what the owner is, who the owner is, where they live, and that they had been imprisoned for assault previously. So how about a fingerprint, isolated from a glass, isolated from a surface? You can't see it. Is there a way you can see it? Do you think so? Fact, yeah. Yeah, that's a fact. And you know the technology. It's not complicated. It's differential moisture. You know, you're going to use a brush. You're going to use a powder, probably a black ferric oxide powder, and the differential moisture is going to help you pick up the print. And what happens is, more recently, if you can compartmentalize what you want to print, you know, you can get it into a compartment and you can vaporize super glue. And the super glue gives you the moisture differential and helps you pick up the print even easier than that. How about a program that's going to match the exact set of prints? No prompting, no human assistance. Put the prints on the screen, you know, and see if you get a match.
Yeah,
You think that exists?
It's called APHIS.
You're close.
Automated fingerprinting.
Yeah. So you think it's true? So someone said crap. Think it's crap? No, it is. It is crap. The thing is, no prompting or no human assistance of any kind. The computer's not that good yet. Okay, so that's crap. But you're right about APHIS. That's the name of the program, APHIS. It's a local program. Every city has one. But you need a fingerprint expert to make this thing work. Because a fingerprint expert takes the print and he takes what's important about the print. You know, where the lines split, where they abruptly stop, things like that. Circles those, and they go into the computer, you know, with the marked up print. And the computer comes back with maybe 24 prints. You can even get them on different angles. And it's actually the expert that makes the match. And in Albuquerque, APHIS is pretty good, 35 to 50%. You know, it tells you it's a good program, but it also should scare you a little bit, because maybe upward to 50% of the people that get picked up and fingerprinted have already been picked up and fingerprinted. You know, what are they doing back out on the street? You know, half of them already. So now when it goes into APHIS, it's compared to a national database. National database. It's a local program, right? APHIS is a local program. So that's crap. And what happens if you don't get a local pickup on it? You can go to the FBI program, the NCIS program, and you know, look through that system. We have access to that system. If you have an idea about who the person is, if you know that they've been in the military, legal profession, teaching profession, medical profession, those professions all have their own databases too, so you'll be able to access those. Okay, Willows and Stokes go to the MGM. A woman's been raped and murdered. You know, they turn off the lights, close the blinds, get the light out of the room, and they put on special goggles, and they have a special light, and they scan through the room. And they're looking for body fluids. And they discover semen on the sheets. They bag the sheets. They take them back to Greg in the lab. Greg analyzes the DNA. Now, within hours, he's got a suspect. And this is someone that's been previously imprisoned for rape. Greg is phenomenal. Greg is the best lab technician, you know, going. And he does other things too. I think he drives the Hummer and things like that. You know, every ME office would love to have Greg because he works miracles. How about the lights? Portable lights that let you see the fluids, body fluids and things like that. And luminol, you've heard of luminol? Same type principle, yeah. That's a good technology. And it's not difficult. It's the basis of fluorescence, and a fluorescent substance is going to absorb the ultraviolet light, and then he's going to re-emit it in a spectrum that you can see. And it depends on chemical makeup. You know, the white paper, tonic water, postage stamps, they also fluoresce. How about DNA? Analyzed within hours, before the next commercial. No. You say crap, huh? Crap on that one? Yeah, crap on that one. 3 to 4 days it takes. That's once it gets on top of someone's priority list. You know, that's the problem right now. In the state, it's taken 2 to 3 months. FBI is taking 10 to 12 months, for identification type things. And 3 to 4 days means the process is started and it's not going to be finished for that long. What happens is when you cut with enzymes, when you're transferring it, binding it, sometime the sample has to sit in a reagent for maybe 24, 36 hours. And so that's what takes the time once the process gets started. How about a database to match the samples? People who've been convicted of sexual offenses and violent crimes. Do you think such a database exists? Fact? Crap? Fact? Fact. Yeah, the key word here is convicted. Once you're convicted, you give up your DNA. You have to. And that's a database. You learn this name too, CODIS. CODIS has been around probably since the 90s, early 90s. And they have an index from the scene, an index from the offender, and they match up the two indices is how they do it. And it's got different levels too, local, state, and national. And all states are in it except Mississippi. Anyone from Mississippi? Okay, I'll apologize for being a little nasty. What I've heard is, in Mississippi, all the DNA is the same. So. I know that's not a nice thing to say, but I have to ask first, don't I? I had a class once when one of the chaperones says, "Well, I'm from Mississippi," and I wasn't sure what to say next, So I said, "Well, do you have any idea why Mississippi might not be in a database here?" And she thought for just a little while, and she says, "Maybe because a lot of us are related." So I had my answer there. Okay, Braun goes to a crime scene. There's a teenager shot in a bathroom in the high school. There's an unusual smell of perfume in the bathroom. So he collects it, using a tube and a suction tube with chalk, using an absorbent agent as chalk. They take 3 bullets from the victim's body, and the victim's sister said he had a fight with a classmate recently. They get a hold of the classmate, they test him for gunshot residue, but it turns out he's a sports shooter and he was at the firing range. But they take his gun anyhow, and they shoot the gun, into a sand pile, into a water bath, retrieve the missiles, put them side by side with the bullets that are recovered from the body, and it turns out that they don't match. So what they do, the next thing of evidence they have is the air that they've taken from the bathroom. And they look at it, it's got typical boys' bathroom smells in it. It's got marijuana, bubble gum, cigars, and oddly enough, it's got Chanteuse perfume. So what they do, they focus on the sister. The sister wears Chanteuse perfume. They get her down to the police station. They throw away the Geneva Convention. They interrogate her for a couple hours, and she finally confesses. So, and it all happens in 45 minutes with commercials. So, how about firearms? Every firearm, puts a distinctive. Yeah, that's a fact. It's a what? That's a fact. You guys know this technology. It's been around for a while. It's the lands and the grooves which are within the barrel. So I don't know who she talked to that the Glocks don't leave marks. Glocks are really well-machined guns, and if you want to look at bullets from 2 Glocks, you're going to see that they are very, very, very similar, and you have to work harder to find out what's different between them. But they all leave the marks on the gun, on the bullet. You look at the caliber of the weapon, the manufacturer of the weapon, and then the individual weapon itself. And we also use unique imprints we call pattern injuries. Yes? No, shotguns don't. No one's ever asked me that, but no, shotguns don't. But what you might get off of a shotgun, if you can get the sabot, the container, could be a match from the hammer, from the firing pin. Yeah. Individual pellets, I don't think they're going to tell you anything. I don't think so. I've never been asked that, but I wouldn't think so. I think you'd have to take shotguns out of this one. Yeah.
Police issue hyper-cautious.
The what? Police what? Never heard of it. It's not a rifled barrel?
No, it's rifle, but it's the octagonal cold-hammered rifling.
God, you know a lot more about guns than I do. Yeah. Okay, how about the technology to determine what kind of perfume is in the air? Think so? Crap? Yeah, crap. Actually, perfumes are too organic. What you're going to and they're. Pardon? How did they figure out that it was chanteuse? Someone must have told them. That's TV. Someone must have told them. So anyhow, Seta was a chemist. So what she would do was, what she did was she talked a lot about gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS, which is the type of technology you're using to find out differentiation in gases. But it's not going to work for perfumes. Okay, the last case. Grissom goes to a scene. There's a body of a teenager there. He's been beaten at a construction site. It's an unfinished house, beaten over the head repeatedly. There's blood spatter on the walls, but they're really not that interested in that. He has a bloody footprint leading away from the body, so they focus on that, take a bunch of pictures, probably take a little plaster cast, and again, they go back to the lab and they put it into a database. Now, so this is the third database we're looking at. And acting on a hunch, which is kind of the answer in CSI, is acting on a hunch, those 4 words. Because they have the greatest hunches. They go to a nearby high school. They probably get there when classes are changing. People are walking in the hall. Someone walks toward them. They look like Diablos, and so walk up and find out and even have blood on them. So again, 45 minutes, they get the thing solved. How about a database to match footprints? You think such a database exists? No? Fact? Crap? Crap? No, it's a fact. Do you remember the OJ trial? Do you remember the Italian loafers? It didn't help convict him, I know, but they was still there. So there's a couple different databases. There's one program that has the information from the crime scene, suspects, and reference database. I don't know why the suspect database would be worth anything, because I wouldn't think a suspect would keep his shoes after he committed a crime, but they say that they do. How about shoe identification in Albuquerque or in Santa Fe or in New Mexico for that matter? Do you think it's a big deal? Do you think they use it a lot? No. Crap. No, they don't. And why wouldn't they?
Because the dirt is too dry.
It's dry, it's sandy, it's hard pan. The soils are pretty much the same. And another thing is the wind. There was a case up in Santa Fe several years ago called the Rose Garden case. Do you remember anything about the Rose Garden case? And there were footprints found outside of a house in some freshly planted rose gardens, and that had something to do with the case. But pretty much bottoms of our shoes are really not that distinctive in New Mexico. How about homicide? Largest percentage of cases that the crime lab does? No, not the largest. What do you think is? What do you think the crime lab spends an awful lot of time on? Accidents? Well, some related to. What happens on Friday nights, Saturday nights? What do they set up in the streets? Checkpoints, yeah. DUI checkpoints, yeah. I mean, look at that. And this is Bernalillo County, granted. It's 6,000 DUIs in a year, but this was like 4 years ago. It's probably closer to 7 now, and I understand it's somewhere like 14,000 in the state, 14,000 DUIs. And the people that investigate and do the laboratory work on the DUIs are the same people that do our toxicology testing. So when we have to have families wait so long for a death certificate, a couple years ago it was like 10 months. Now it's sometime 2 or 3 months wait for a death certificate because all the laboratory people that produce the tox results are spending all their time on DUIs. How about DNA analysts, master's degrees, forensic experience? Do you think that's a requirement for a DNA analyst? No? You hope so? Yeah, it is. And in a lot of aspects of crime lab work, you need master's degrees because what's happening with testimony in the courts these days, it's very technical testimony. So much of it does go back to labs. So, you know, what they say is Bachelor of Science for most jobs in the lab, most technical jobs, and a master's probably for firearms and DNA, a lot of protocols, a lot of quality controls in place to make sure the lab is keeping its credibility so that it functions in the court system. Okay, one more thing. How about forensic scientists? You find out that they're really ridiculously good looking, most of them. Crap, someone say crap? It's a fact, you know. Geez, you see that on TV all the time. Oh, I don't use myself as an example. Okay, I got one more short one, Bob, but I don't know how to find it. This is a little one I put together for, I gave a presentation last year to Tony Hillerman's Southwest Writers class, and they wanted a little more information on the comparison with CSI, you know, so that all their writers, you know, really know what they're talking about rather than trying to write off of the TV stuff. So this is just very short, but this is directly some of the stuff in our office. I think it's factor crap too. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so we'll take a look at, let's look at their vehicles. You know, look at this guy. This thing is bigger than a Denali. You know what Denali is? It's a mountain in Alaska. So this is one of the vehicles they use. It's got a mini crime lab in the trunk. They've got this is their Hummer. You know, their Hummer has a mobile forensic crime lab, you know, computers, LCD screens, you know, about as much as we have in our building there. And you've seen the silver Hummer. And this is what we got, you know. Here's our 94 Blazer. Baby's had 3 wrecks, changed engines a couple times, already been to 19,500 scenes, you know. It's not a Hummer. This is what you see on CSI. Look, these guys aren't wearing anything. I see some bad stuff looks like coming off of that body. I mean, these are some of the things we wear. Different mask, a lot of suited. We're really well suited up, most of our people. We don't put a Big Mac on the deceased stomach and eat off of it. And it's always dark, isn't it, in their autopsy suites? You ever notice how dark it is? Like that. This is what ours look like. It's pretty light. During midday? Well, it could be Pittsburgh in the 40s. Where's Bob? Yeah, it is amazing how they do that. And here's a scene. Here's an investigator scene. You know, what do you see? You know, Armani, Versace, Prada. You know, I mean, these guys dress to the nines, don't they? Our investigators, that's kind of what they look like, you know. It's just a regular bunch of looking people there. Cases, well, if they do 3 cases an episode, they're doing 69 cases in a year. We're doing, 2 years ago, 2,077 autopsies. That's just the autopsies. And if we look at the criminal autopsies, theirs are probably all criminal. Ours 2 years ago was 153. Last year we did 194 criminal autopsies. We had over 5,000 cases in 2006. Last year we had probably about 50, something like that. What's it take us to do a case? Probably about 15 days, you know, because you got the autopsy, you got your laboratory results, you've got your histology, which is all your microscope results. You just have a lot of things going, and it takes that long, plus interviewing witnesses and stuff like that. And what CSI take? About 45 minutes with the commercials. And usually we are somewhere in the ballpark of 1,500 cases at various stages on any day. So just an awful lot of cases that we handle. What else is happening? The other impact of CSI in the jury system. You know, you're going to be on juries pretty soon, and what you're going to find out is that the judge, the defense attorney, the prosecutor all have to give you special instructions to say, hey, don't believe that crap you see on TV. You know, you're not going to come in to sit in the jury box and see the bullet, you know, go in the person's side and bounce off his backbone and jump up, you know, through his heart and go out his clavicle. You won't see a picture of that. That, you know, we just don't have that. So don't expect this level of evidence, you know, in trying a case. Laboratories, I don't know. It's usually, well, how many people do you see on CSI? 5 or 6? And they do it all, right? You know, they do the autopsy, they do the investigation, they go out and jump in their Hummer and catch the perp. You know, in the meantime, they've done the lab work, the anthropology work, the histology work, the entomology work, you know, the bug stuff, if that's applicable. We should just hire them, I guess, instead of using all these different people. But there's some good things coming out of it, and that's that people are hooking on to new machinery. It's being cheaper. Most you know, the machinery and a lot of the techniques and technology they use is good, and it's real. But most places can't afford it. Most labs, you know, we've had people from production companies come to OMI, and part of their movie, and we've supported a lot of different movies, but part of their movie is going to be in the morgue, and they want to come in and do it like it really is, and they come in and look at ours, and they say, we're just going to go back to the studio and build one, you know. So we need something more modern, more believable, you know. So, and you know about the new technology to the old evidence. You know what's happening with DNA. DNA is really one of the greatest things that's come along, and it's getting, you know, it's rectifying justice problems, you know, where people are in jail for crimes that they didn't commit. Another thing that CSI is doing is that, well, it brought you guys out tonight, you know. I mean, it's an interesting topic. We need forensic pathologists. We have about 500 jobs in the country, and we have about 400 forensic pathologists. So, you know, yes, ma'am.
How many years did you say you had had education?
Well, 13 or 14. It takes a long time. No, you got 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and then 1 year of fellowship, forensic pathology fellowship. So it's 13 years. It's a long haul. Yeah, but you don't have to decide it all right away. You know, there's a lot of branches along the way. A lot of people. Pardon? Well, they do the autopsy. Their basic responsibility is to determine the cause and the manner of death. And they do that through the autopsy, through a microscopic look at all the body parts, through looking at testimony, looking at police reports, police evidence. Sometimes we need some anthropology work that supports them. And they do a lot of testimony themselves. They spend a lot of time in court in civil cases and criminal cases. So they have a pretty busy week. So what's happening is CSI is just getting guys like you more interested, and we hope, you know, more of you into medical school and see what happens, you know, see if we can get some more forensic pathologists out there. And that's it. How about, thank you. Do I have time for questions, or
Tim,
no, it's
thank
after?
you. Yeah, well, I think a couple. Thank you very
Okay.
much. I think
Okay,
you can
Earl.
see how much people enjoyed it.
Good, thank you.
Any last questions?